Hello,
Hello, how's it going?
going good. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, you must, because you you answered how it was going. So unless you're clairvoyant,
Yeah.
um, well, in which case you could still hear me. There's nothing. I'm just sorry. I just saw that you have this driver doc, so I'm kind of
Yeah.
glancing through it. So I mean, this looks like you've just straight up coded the thing. Is that accurate? Is
Uh, yeah, I tried out the both of the things, um, and I was kind of planning to do a demo here as well, but for whatever reason, I'm facing some errors. But the gist of it is like, what do we want to do in terms of writing a driver? So I'm thinking like we could go two ways. One is like rewrite audit results on the same file, and another one is like allow users to have multiple files, and then we basically create a new file for every audit run and then delete the past files according to the number that users want to maintain. So for example, if they provide 3 in the config itself, then beyond 3 latest file, gatekeeper's driver will clean up those files. In that way, like it's a kind of async uh, delivery of the messages, and then we don't have to worry about, or at least users doesn't don't have to worry about like what happens if they fail to report all the violations when the next audit is overwriting the same ones.
so just I'm gonna try to summarize just to make sure I understood. These two implementations, the way they differ is whether for each audit run you are clobbering the file, the pre-existing file, and just writing the new results versus keeping the last n audit runs in uh, a sort of rotating set.
Yeah.
I mean, rotating set is honestly to me the clear answer there. Uh, yeah.
Okay.
The the only question for me is honestly who does the rotation, right? Whether it's because you assume like, and I'm going off of like syslog and other stuff here, but like the thing that does the ingestion might have an opinion on like file naming and rotation, and might be responsible for doing the rotation, basically like deleting the file once it's confident that it's like pushed it out to whatever central repository. Um, Honestly, I don't think these two things are in tension, right? Because you could just like straight up disable rotation if you or cleanup if you wanted to. And also overwriting is really just writing multiple files, but um, keeping it with a file length of one and maybe not having a different name every time you generate. Um, yeah, so I'm starting to see, and I don't think this is like the MVP, but basically, if there is some way of specifying a file name format and configuring the cleanup, right? And so the file name format could basically be constants plus certain variables, right? Like the audit timestamp or some like increasing integer, that increases by one every audit run or whatever other kind of like name schema log streamers like to use.
So I think like having the audit timestamp as a file name would be appropriate just because it's automatically incremental, and then whoever is reading can also looking at the file name figure out which one is the latest timestamp that they need to read from in case the reader is slower than gatekeeper's writing capacity.
Right, and the question there is just like, assuming they're using some sidecar to slurp up this data, what are the expectations of the sidecar, right? Like, are they cool with using timestamps, or is there some other thing they'd like to use? And as I said, like, I'm kind of like running before I'm walking here, right? Like, it's perfectly possible for us to start with timestamp, see if that works, and then sort of know that it's possible that we may want to add customized naming in the future. And not starting with customized naming gives us a chance to get some data on what people's requirements around it
Yeah,
would be.
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, sorry, Sartaj and Rita, we started the discussion without you. Yeah.
No, this is good.
Oh, no worries, yeah. I didn't get notification for this one. My Zoom was closed, so I was like, oh.
Yeah, and we were just talking about single file versus multi-file output, and kind of my TLDR is single file just seems like a special case of multi-file output anyway, and multi-file seems like the right thing to do in terms of like, because there's other systems ingesting, you want to give them time to synchronize. And I could see over time multi-file getting configurable enough to where it basically becomes configurable to be single file, if that's something users want.
So another question for multi-file is basically how do we reflect the state that this particular like gatekeeper is done reporting with particular audit, and then readers can safely read from it.
So we're incrementally writing to this file. There's
I mean, so one of the suggestion was like we can at the end of reporting update the file name to reflect that it is ready somehow.
mhm.
Uh, do you have any other ideas around how do we reflect that state so that readers can successfully determine that out of these three files, Gatekeeper is currently using the one and the rests are ready to be read from, and then the latest file can be read from basically.
Yeah, and that also brings up the topic, how does gatekeeper signify that it's done writing to the driver? That seems like something we missed with the current driver implementation. But
So one thing could be there, like we already report a log saying that the audit is completed, and then we need to call out on publish to generate that event as well, which basically tells the driver that the audit is completed.
I like that, and we could also write that log event to the file.
Yeah.
Like I think this is kind of like a yes and kind of thing. Like I think it makes sense to affirmatively have content in the file that says the audit is complete, just as a sanity check. I think renaming the file is definitely a good idea, because or having the ability to rename the file, I should say, because it could be that users can then configure whatever scraper to look for a, I don't know, an underscore done suffix or whatever we want to put in there. An alternative could be to like write out a separate file that says, hey, this file is complete. That seems like it might be less likely to be useful, unless someone's like coding something up from scratch to take advantage of that. The other thing I would say is, as far as I know, most scrapers like stream file contents, right? So having the Sentinel value inside the file itself is probably a good idea for those models. And also, if you're writing a streaming scraper, you probably don't want to see the file renamed out from underneath you. So probably what I would do is I would start with the Sentinel value. And
Sentinel value meaning log
like,
and,
yeah, like you start with audit started, you end with audit complete, right? And just make sure that the way this thing is structured, right? This kind of puts an onus on the driver to make sure that events are written in the order they're received.
Yeah.
Which I think is fine for a file driver, personally. But yeah, just be careful with parallelism at that point. And yeah, so having those entries begin audit, end audit, streaming is fine. If I wouldn't be against the renaming thing, I would just say like make it turn offable or configurable if you add it. And like if you had to choose between the two, I would start with the Sentinel value.
yeah. But so for Sentinel value, what's the case for using multiple files, right? You said that renaming is not up, like if somebody is streaming, then renaming is not going to be the case. Then like we are going to write audit results in new files anyways.
It eases rotation is one thing. You know, we could try to create a round robin database here, but I wouldn't. I'm you know, just thinking about again, like syslog, if I remember right, it like what it does actually is it keeps the output file, the most current log has a consistent name, and then once that log file fills up, it renames the old file, or it renames it to like a -1 kind of name, or maybe it adds a timestamp, or I forget exactly. And by fills up, I mean, I think there's like size thresholds, or maybe it's day thresholds, right? Like, you know, once this file has been active for so many days. Maybe it's both. Sorry, my memory is vague here. But so that's another model, right? Where you keep your head file consistently named, and you rename older files to older values. I frankly, I would do some research here on how people are most likely to consume these things.
What would be the ways to research it? Because I was talking to someone and like this case came up where uh, the reader was basically slower than Gatekeeper, so they
Mhm.
couldn't catch up with one audit. Like during this same audit, they couldn't report all the violations that Gatekeeper had reported before the gatekeepers would start the next audit for their configurations. And in that case, like even keeping the head to the same file and then renaming the older file would not be appropriate, right? Because if gatekeeper renames the older file and somebody's reading from it with the head being there, then they'd be abrupted with the audit.
Yeah, I mean, so my first question for that user then would be like, what are they using to scrape these logs, and what are the configuration knobs for it? Because like, yeah, no, they have a genuine problem, but then my next question would be, okay, if we use multiple files, how would their system be configured to handle those multiple files? And my knowledge here is old. I apologize, but like something like Logstash, I think for JSON formatted logs, that's a scraper that was used in like 2016. Maybe it's still popular. And also too, we could start to think about like output formats, right? Because syslog has a different format, say, than something that expects JSON structured logs. Log4j, I know, is I believe another log scraper. Does anyone have any tools that they're aware of besides syslog, log4j, logstash?
My knowledge is even limited than yours. Because I've never worked with logging before. So.
Log4j might be a library too, so I might be wrong about that one. Sorry, go ahead.
The Fluent Pit.
Oh yeah, okay, that's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of them. Yeah.
And the question is, because all of them have faced this rotation problem, I guarantee you. So we're wondering about the range of solutions that they have. And frankly, again, file format. Like, what are they designed to slurp up? And I think these things are actually pretty complex in terms of like how all the different options for configuring them. So it actually may be a fair bit of research.
Yeah. Yeah. But at the other end, like we can, I mean, I'll do the research, but I think this is a domain where the risk of failure is less because we can always write another driver if user requests it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we should just at least have a user in mind.
Yeah.
So start with a popular framework, or at least that, maybe even just that user who is having that issue. Just ask them, what are you using? And we can start there.
All right, cool. Yeah, I think that's the only thing I needed to bring up. Do you have any thoughts, Sir Rita, in this matter?
I don't have anything on this one. Are we done with the this driver export violations topic?
Yeah, I'll try to do some research and I'll talk to uh, the person I was talking to, and then we can go from there. I'll bring this up next week as well, so we can lock down. Probably.
Okay, can you make sure you update the design doc to reflect the
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
And that honestly, that might also just straight up solve the multiple file thing, right? Whether these log ingesters are expecting one giant, basically ring database, right? Where each file is actually a continuation of a longer file, or there might still be options.
Yeah, I think we are done with this one, Shartesh. If you have anything.
Sorry, trying to get on mute. I think the only other thing that I had was to ask Max for a review for the OPA V1 PR on.
Oh, sorry. Did I thought I got, but yeah, I must have left a pending comment on one. Yeah, I'll do that today.
Yeah, I think I addressed your comment to review the V1 change, just to so we match with frameworks. But other than that, it should be good.
Okay. Cool.
And then after that, we can work with Styra on the engine V1, V0, whatever, bike shading.
Yeah, hopefully I unblocked unblocked him on the what is Rego rewriter used for. It looks like there might be some cruft in Rego rewriter at this point, though.
I still think his PR can be smaller, and maybe I'll suggest that. Break it into two, right? One is to bump V1 APIs, and then one is to actually support both intelligently or expose it to users.
Yeah, exposing it to users is the harder one.
Right. And I don't think that should block the V1 APIs.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I think. Yeah, let's divide it into two.
I did suggest that, but maybe he just hasn't had time. I'll just add a comment and then help like move things along. I don't want to rush him, so yeah. And it's not like we don't have something already, so yeah. I mean, like V1 API isn't blocking us, right? So
No, I think it's just that the users want it just to be on the latest and greatest, but there is no actual hey, we're using V1.
no,
Yeah.
no, not at all. No, sorry. I was more talking about the imports. You know how the imports isn't actually using V1, right?
Oh, right. So I tried that initially, and
Yeah.
then that gave me the Rego rewriter errors. I don't know where they are. I copy pasted somewhere. And then I didn't end up going that route. I just kept it on V0 and did the deprecation linter ignore. So I
What
think
were,
we might need to do the Rego rewriter changes maybe on that side. I haven't
what were
explored too much.
yeah, what were the Rego rewriter errors as far as like upgrading the package version, not language version? That one I know.
Yeah, so what? Yeah. When I did the just hey like YOLO update everything to V1, I got Rego rewriter. It was like 4 keyword not found or something like that. So anything that's on the Rego side, the new stuff that got added.
For keyword not found.
Yeah, it's like whatever I'm making it up now, but it was like the anything Rego V1, like any new functionality they added in the like syntax level, it was like something like not found.
Oh yeah, no, I mean Rego rewriter doesn't work with the new syntax.
Right.
I guess I'm just a little surprised that it also doesn't work with the V1 package version. It sounds like maybe they've changed their Golang libraries a bit.
So yeah, I think they might need to do some exploring there, see if that works. I just basically like literally find all, replaced all, and then got that error. Even though Styra said, hey, if you update to V1, everything will work fine, and it'll like fall back to V0. Yeah.
Gotcha. I mean, the good news is Rego rewriter isn't that much code, and Charlie Charlie should be able to read it pretty quickly, right? Because it's mostly just messing with the abstract syntax tree.
Any other topics? I do have one other topic that I want to talk about. Maybe more like notification. Are there other topics?
Go for it.
Okay, so I don't know if y'all remember, but like this was like couple couple KubeCons away where we were talking about like maybe having like a joint session between the the emission webhook solutions versus entry cell VAP, right? Remember this? And then I think one of the submissions got rejected or whatever, but this coming KubeCon U that one got accepted. See if I can grab the link. And I apologize, I didn't like give you guys a heads up until now, mainly because I didn't think it was gonna get accepted.
How dare you? How
I mean, for what it's worth, we did talk about this a long time ago. It's just like it's like delayed satisfaction.
I'm sorry, we require at least 6 months ahead heads up.
Yeah. So I pasted the link in the chat. I'm sorry, in the schedule, but also I'll put it in the chat. But yeah, I'll be meeting with those folks to work on the presentation. But if there are specific things you want to make sure we talk about, please let me know. And whenever that thing is ready, I'll share with you folks for feedback.
So this is like a panel type thing?
I mean, I think it's like a presentation, but like in a panel style, because it's technically part of the maintainer track, like the working group policy working group, I think. So I guess like as part of that working group, you can talk about anything, I guess. But it's not like a panel in the sense like there's like a Q&A or anything. It's more this is like the practical guide, and then people could ask questions, I guess.
Nice.
And the inspiration for this was mainly seeing people asking questions in SIGAuth Slack channel where people were like, hey, there's this new VAP thing. But I also know there's like Hibernal, Gatekeeper, what's up with that? Like, when do I use what? Yeah. So hopefully this will provide some clarity as far as like the differentiations and when to use what. It's more again for user experience or user enhancements.
Yeah, I know. I was talking to Jay the other day, and we were both confused about like the audit usage of in VAP, and also I guess the pod security admission. Because we all mean audit as like different things.
No, audit in VAP is just like API server logs, as far as I understand.
Right, yeah. But we use audit as like in a different way. So, and then there's also audit in the pod security admission, and then that's.
Sorry, what do you mean we use audit in a different way?
Like audit logs versus auditing. Yeah. We audit, they write out audit logs.
So like we audit existing resources, they audit like net new resources.
I mean, they don't, in the sense that we use the word audit at all. They write out a historical record of requests that can be used for
right, because there's no like brownfield scan, right? Brownfield, like that's okay. So instead of saying okay, yeah, everyone's saying audit, but that means different things.
Yeah, this is just an example of one confusion. Yeah.
Right. Because one is emission time, right? One
Right.
is all the time. Okay.
I
Great.
think for me, the most interesting signal would probably be around audit and shift left. Like those, I think, are probably the most fundamental weakness of the validating admission policy syntax, right? Where you have to, if you write a validating admission policy, you have to be very careful about how you write it in order to have that policy be useful in any context other than admission. And also certain features go away. You can't call authorizer, you can't depend on version conversion in an audit context or a shift left context. Also, resource is not really present or a concept at that point, right? It's more about kind. So I think getting a sense of the value users place in those use cases would probably be the strongest signal for like future development along these lines, right? Like, does VAP need to start figuring out maybe it should be subsettable in some way, which would make life probably easier for everyone? Or is it fine, we don't see much overlap? Referential also kind of plays in here, but there's no like syntactical limit. That's more of like an operational limit, right? Like VAP doesn't want to accept the complexity of querying arbitrary amounts of data at admission, but it could theoretically, like from a pure like linguistic standpoint. Does this?
I mean, we've talked about this before, and also this was like in one of the slides in past KubeCon talks, if you remember. And I remember like people, I just like looked at people and they were like so lost if what I was talking about. And I think part of the reason is because it was just like really early VAP entry, so no one even knew what I was saying. But I think now it's a bit different. Which again, I appreciate the talk, right? Because it's now more people are actually using VAP. And by the way, that shift left argument may not be forever, meaning I pasted a comment from an issue. This is from CC where she was saying she plans to work on a tool that basically provides a shift left testing. So maybe in the future that would be a differentiation.
That depends on. So is she trying to write, a test suite for developing VAP code, or
No, let me paste the issue. Like I was following this because this was like one of the things that broke the DRA feature. So basically DRA has like so DRA is dynamic resource allocation, right? Sorry, I'm like context switching. And part of that there is like cell expressions to help the controller to pick the right device, basically, right? Or it helps the device admins to create the expressions that they want to expose to users, right? And so part of that, I think there were some like cost estimates that kind of broke things, and then there was like maybe a bad cell expression at some point. So there were some talks about like how do we validate bad cell expressions basically and catch it early.
Yeah, so this is testing cell. This isn't testing config, which is
fair. But I feel like with that, I mean, Gator started with that too, right? But then we expanded. So I feel like this is just on the road to that. Maybe. I don't know.
So the I actually kind of slightly disagree with the Gator. I realize that's something we put into Gator, but I think the starkest example of the difference is so Gator, we only more recently put in the admission review, the ability to use an admission review as an input to Gator, right? For people who wanted to test policies.
I mean, define recent. It's been there for at least 2-3 years.
More recent as it, I don't know if it's been 2-3 years. It feels more like one, maybe 1.5.
I've always, I don't know. That doesn't matter.
The ability to intake an admission review request.
Yeah.
Okay. It was not the first thing that got implemented, right?
Yeah, totally. That's why I said it's like, I feel like that's the future. Like, you start with, I just want to make sure the code is good. And then it just expands to, oh, but if I give you the review request.
Yeah, the difference here is that, so Gator, we started with a smaller set of syntax and then expanded it to accept admission review. If they're talking about using VAP here, right, and they're not just talking about testing VAP code, you're actually looking at taking a wider set of syntax and then trying to say, no, you could just use a subset, right? And so that's you're kind of like trying to put the genie back in the bottle at that point, because you're basically saying, if your VAP uses version conversion, we can't deal with that if it's a CRD, at least. If your VAP uses resource, we probably can't deal with that. If it's unless you have the custom resource definition. I'm assuming in tree stuff you could compile in some of these mappings. And then also any kind of like access to metadata, right, or old object, that stuff doesn't work unless you have like an admission review object. So you're kind of writing a different language at that point. And that's, I think, fine. It's just that's harder to do the longer these things go on. And this is why I'm saying it might be useful if we could get some kind of signal from the Q&A portion of this talk around, like, is that a use case that might resonate with users? Because that's the only way I think that Entry would start to see these sort of barriers as problems to be addressed versus something that is outside the scope of the design for VAP.
Just to clarify, so you want to make in the Q&A, you want to get a sense of whether or not the shift left to test actual Kubernetes resources is an ask or not? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, either auditing of existing state or shift left. Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. I don't know how possible that is, right? Because users ask their own questions, but I feel like there's a way to.
I mean, people who are attending this is probably more knowledgeable in this than not. I'm thinking.
Yeah. So Yeah, I don't know if I was like hyper clear, but I think surfacing this use case is a way of influencing the development trajectory in a way that can be very useful.
For that?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I definitely think these are useful. It's just at what cost, right? Like auditing of existing state, like that could be pretty costly for entry to do, right?
Like at a code level or
in terms of impact on the cluster.
It actually might be less expensive to run it natively than what Gatekeeper is doing.
Gatekeeper, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And if you have a standard way of expressing these policies, then like cloud providers can do their own tricks, right? Like rather than accessing the cluster directly, maybe there's like a data cache somewhere, or who knows. So you're avoiding.
Yeah. I mean, that's a different angle, like in terms of like maybe it's more more secure, right? Like you can argue that.
Yeah, more secure, more scalable. Sorry, but
yeah, and scalable, yeah.
But if there's a common syntax, then like it's something that can be invested in relatively confidently. At that point, though, I think they're kind of looking at Gatekeeper's approach in a rough sense, right? Where you can write these portable policies using a subset of the syntax, and that either projects onto VAP or is ingestible as like a VAP equivalent resource.
I'm sorry, but you're still just talking about using VAP for like none of the webhooks, right? Just VAP entry by itself, right? For scanning existing states, right?
Yes, and I'm also speaking broadly, right? Because this is a thing that doesn't exist. Who knows what the technology names or whatever would wind up being.
Let me think about this. Yeah.
I mean, it's basically arguing to eliminate Gatekeeper and Caverno's usefulness.
Yeah,
in some way.
exactly. This is an interesting dance.
So, but in this world, right? Like for gatekeeper, the cluster admin doesn't have to be the same one as the gatekeeper admin, and then the gatekeeper admin can enforce policies or write policies, and other than gatekeeper admin also can do that. But if we combine that with basically etcd, then how are those roles defined basically?
Well, so I think that's a separate question, right? The fact that the config existing, like what code path the executors of that config use, is separate from who's allowed to write that config, right? Like, so yes, like so if I take a constraint template, right? Gatekeeper already has like full read access to everything, right? So ergo, people who write a constraint and a constraint template have read access to everything if they can like read the audit results. So and that read access is gated by RBAC, right? Do they have that permissions? Right. Whether Gatekeeper is going through the API server to do that, or whether Gatekeeper can sort of, sidestep the API server and reach directly into etcd is moot, right? Because basically Gatekeeper defines sort of the delegation window of, hey, here's what the it means to have the power to write a constraint template. And I'm not going to do anything more than that, but you can, I delegate to you my access for constraint templates. And then whether it achieves that access or how it achieves that access is like a separate question.
Yeah, and for the record, gatekeeper stuff is also in SCD, like just for the record, like if we're talking about data, right? I think Jay, your point was more about RBAC, right? Like who can create these policies. And so from that perspective, you know, I could create an RBAC role binding for a particular group just for VAP as well. So from that perspective, it's one-to-one experience to gatekeeper. Because gatekeeper resource is also cluster scoped. Okay. Anyway, there's just FYI on this talk, and if there are things you want to make sure we cover, please let me know.
Yeah. External data seems like a pretty interesting use case here, particularly with mutation.
Oh, right. I forgot to put, well, we used to have mutation, if you remember. And then now it's like, oops, that's not really a thing.
Oh, but external data with mutation
I
is
know,
actually like
but
a
I'm
killer.
just saying mutation by itself. Like at the time of writing that slide, that map was not there, right? But now it is. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that might be a. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mix.
Oh no, I was just saying I'm super glad that there's a core mutation thing that's.
which I still haven't tested.
What were you gonna say, Sertash?
I was just gonna say, like the pitfalls for mutation we talked about. I think that might be like an interesting thing to discuss there too.
Oh, you mean for just in general?
In general, yeah, like how is map handling it versus how is Kyverno handling it? How are we handling it? I think we were
that could easily take a whole session, like that alone.
yeah, definitely a hot topic. I think we were being a bit more safer than the other ones.
Yeah.
If community has seen any issues and whatnot, that might be an interesting talk. Versus like how is map handling it?
Yeah.
I think the safety stuff no one has yet gotten burned by. The scalability side of it, though, right? So if your use case from way back when of rewriting a Docker tag to a Docker hash, being able to do that performantly if you have like a lot of containers, I think Gatekeeper has, I'm going to say, the only reasonable approach here, because it's the only way you can both batch requests and make the requests in parallel, right? Because latency is a huge consideration for external data with mutation.
Well, external data in general is definitely a differentiation, right? But yeah, I think for Sertash's point, it would be good to talk about what are the differences between map versus Kyverno's mutation and Gatekeeper's mutation. And what's the like sort of the risks versus functionality that you get from it. And try to do it in a few minutes. Yeah.
Right, and how to prevent from users from shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah.
I have a hard time saying anything other than use map unless you have external data, then use Gatekeeper. Like, I'd be very curious about an argument for any other answer there.
I still need to test it to know a bit more, like to get a diff of it with Gatekeeper's mutation
versus map.
Yeah. that's an issue in our backlog that I need to do at some point.
Yeah, it might be good to create like a table or something like that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if map was across the board expressively more powerful. Like Gatekeeper's locked down syntax, ironically, is what we rely on for external data.
Okay. And obviously, Kyverno offers a lot of really powerful functionalities that could be risky. Like for example, what was the one that someone raised was like?
Oh, the resource generation?
Yeah, generation and deletion.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not mutation necessarily. That's just a whole.
Yeah, that's a
other-
whole new thing. Yeah.
That's like like give me a controller. Yay. But it is in Kyverno, right? It is.
Yeah. Like I mean, it's a fair question if you're comparing Caverno to anything else, maybe. But given this is about admission specifically,
Right.
like, and maybe I'm kind of like toying with that by talking about, well, what about like the auditing and the shift left by moving it a bit beyond that, but
Yeah. Oh, by the way, oh, sorry, someone say something.
Oh no, I was just gonna ask if you had any other thoughts, but you have thoughts.
Just one thought, one last one, I promise. There was someone who asked about like a VAP validation tool in the SIG-Auth channel. And then somebody was like, oh, there's the editor online, right? If you remember, the cell, what am I saying?
That doesn't, yeah, the cell playground.
The playground, yes. So someone mentioned that, but I don't think that's what he was looking for. And then the Kyverno guy said, hey, we have a shift left tool that you can use. And then, of course, I chimed in and I said, hey, you can try to use Gator because Gator can do that now. And then they were like, oh, but is the cell stuff that you put in constraint template, is that the same as a VAP, right? And I said that I think it is because we're also, Gatekeeper is also generating the VAP, right? So essentially it's whatever you put in the constraint template, it's what you will get in the VAP, right? So from that perspective, you can use that to test your VAP.
Yeah, like there's some rewriting there, right? Like the any object, for instance. Like so Gator would need to expand out VAP resources, which is definitely possible.
Wait, hold on. So you're saying that any stuff wouldn't work?
So any object, like if you were to just like copy paste that into VAP, it wouldn't work unless you also added in like the variable definition.
Oh, the variable, yeah. But when we create the generate, oh, I see. Yeah, but when we create our VAP, we include the variable, so that's why it works. I see.
Yeah. So Gatekeeper generates it. There's no reason Gator couldn't generate.
Kind of wish that's not the case, but
what's it?
I kind of wish we don't have like Gatekeeper specific things, but too late. Oh well.
Well, I don't know. Like this is the well, one, any object you don't need to use if you don't want to use it, right? That's just for portability from Rego to ease rewriting. But other things like using kind, matching against kind, which again you don't need to use, but that's about shift left, right?
Oh, I think your point is if you just want to test your VAP, you could totally use constraint template to test it. Right. It's just if you were to use the exact same constraint template in your cluster, the experience might be different.
I think that's true. I would also point out, though, that some of VAP is kind of not testable currently, like the authorizer, use of authorizer.
Mhm.
How is that mock outable by anyone?
You mean shift left?
What's that?
You mean in shift left?
Like anywhere outside of a cluster, right? Because
Right, shift left. Yeah.
like resource, like it's gonna be like a broken record for me, but yeah, there's currently no mechanism for invoking some of these like built-in functions and behaviors that VAP has. Core Kubernetes could do it, by the way, if they wanted to. Like just your input to the test environment would be an admission review, not an object.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Cell Playground is
It's different.
not sufficient. What's that?
It's different. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't. You can test like if you're writing your cell syntax correctly, as long as you're not trying to use like the built-in.
Yeah. I definitely tried to use it before, and it did not work the way I thought it would.
Yeah, like I use Gator to test.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. I mean,
Okay. I started with Cell Playground and then switched to Getter just because I didn't want to keep writing variables and whatnot.
aw, that's cool.
So
Go
can
ahead.
we add Getter expand for VAP? Is that
Gator
something
what?
users would want?
Sorry, say that one more time.
Like translate constraint template to VAP basically through Getter.
Oh, you mean as a feature?
Yeah.
Like to generate one,
Yeah.
like a YAML file.
Yeah.
Like a real, like a non-gatekeeper specific VAP.
That's kind of a cool feature. I like it.
That is cool. And yeah.
I mean, it definitely makes Gatekeeper less useful, but adds functionality to Gator.
No, but it's a way to say, hey, people need this, and Gator is a tool to do it.
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah. I mean, it's like it makes Gatekeeper less thing, but makes Gator look better.
I mean, if you want audit, if you want like
Yeah, true. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good
don't worry, we still have other good oh, by the way, that also reminds me, like I was in a SRC meeting and someone was like, oh, let's write a VAP thing. And then I was like, oh yeah, like and they were like, oh, or maybe like one of the webhooks. And I was like, oh, actually Gatekeeper can do both now. Because I think they were like, oh, or deal with Rego. And then I was like, oh, by the way, Gatekeeper can do both now. And then they were like, really? So, and this was like before Christmas. So I still don't think people know Gatekeeper can do both.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
We need to do a better job with that.
Yep.
Obviously I would do my best in these talks, but maybe there's more things we can do and like just to get the word out.
We did a CNCF webinar for VAP stuff as well a while
I know,
back.
we were just talking about this. The webinars are hard to gauge the impact sometimes, depending on who happens to know it's happening.
Yeah. So what other way to market ourselves then?
Blog posts, and I mean, I think write the content first, right, and then have more people like tweet it, I guess. Yeah.
And the other thing I'll point out too is there's this weird, like if people are writing VAP content because constraint templates are a subset of VAP, that's actually a barrier to adoption.
Prior to adoption for...
if someone's like, hey, there's all these great VAP content things I'd like to use, but I would need to rewrite them in Gatekeeper, right?
Yeah,
and
totally.
maybe not a hard rewrite, depending on how much they rely on stuff we can't use. But that's another reason for pushing for, I think the term here is state-based policy enforcement in tree Kubernetes, because if we can like sort of nudge the content generation community to prefer state-based because it's the most portable, that we could more effectively slurp up.
I mean, I definitely think if we can make it easier for people to just bring their VAP and... Oh, so Jay, your idea for converting constraint template to VAP, can we do the other way too?
Yeah.
No, I'm serious. I feel like that would seriously help with adoption.
Yeah.
We can with errors is the thing, right?
Yeah.
Like if your VAP looks a certain way, Gatekeeper can ingest it without modification. If you rely on resource, if you rely on version conversion, if you use authorizer, maybe do some other stuff. Like,
I mean, Gator can sift that out and tell people like, hey, can't do it. And actually that's not bad, right? Because I would much rather know that doesn't work with Gator than once it's in the cluster and Gatekeeper bombs out.
yeah. Well, I mean, Gatekeeper wouldn't bottom, like the way the constraint template works, you wouldn't be able to put it into a constraint template. Like we just keep that out of there. But yeah, I agree that it could be a useful tool. And the other like thing that's cool about it is the reason these things are not in Gatekeeper is because they're not portable. So no one has them other than core Kubernetes.
I see. Sorry, can you explain what you meant earlier? Like if I have a cell expression with resources, what and I put it in constraint templates, what do you mean by we don't? Yeah, what do you mean?
So I'm talking about resource versus kind here, right? Where resource is technically the element of the URI path on the K8s API server. So it's lowercase pod versus uppercase p pod. And the reason why that matters is VAP uses resource as the core sort of object identifier, which makes sense because kind technically is identifying the schema shape of an object and is not one-to-one. For instance, scale is a kind, and there's scale sub-resources for stateful set and deployment. So if you're looking to write purely an admission controller, resource is the most specific selector you can use if you want to make sure that you can scope things to kind of like the type of request. However, you know, the manifests that we apply to kubectl, right? Kubectl apply manifest. Resource isn't in there at all. It's all kind, because that's serialized data where it's you're recording the expected format to be deserialized. And there's kind of an irony here in that kubectl uses kind and the discovery API to like infer the resource and then push it out to the API server under the correct URI. And that leads to some messiness, right? Because certain kinds have a well-defined resource associated with them. Most kinds that people think of: stateful set, pod, deployment, network policy, namespace, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then there's other kinds like metadata, and I mentioned scale. Technically, admission review is a kind. I'm sure there are others I'm forgetting because I don't deal with them so much. Where they don't have this mapping, or like a pod template, right, which is used in like 5 different resources as a sub-resource, or 5 different kinds, I should say. It's non-specific. So to bubble this all the way up, unless you're talking to an API server and running this discovery API, you may not be able to reinfer resource just from kind. And sometimes it doesn't make sense to. So have I done a kind of okay job of explaining why that's not like portable outside of admission?
Kind of. Yeah. It's like we use different APIs, I guess, in this case.
Yeah, well, some resource requests are transient, right? Like if you want to attach to a pod, for instance, that's not persisted state, so it's not auditable or shift left validatable. But it is something that an admission webhook could help you with.
Right.
That's maybe the best example here. And so it totally makes sense if you want to have a maximally powerful admission webhook to use resource. But if you're trying to do like the most common case and you're trying to like make things portable to different enforcement contexts, you have to go with something that's less expressively powerful, but more, or maybe less specific, but more general.
Yeah, I get you. So then, again, that might also be another differentiator for VAP then, right? That VAP is able to validate things that the webhooks cannot.
That actually is not true for Gatekeeper, at least. Because Gatekeeper still receives like the admission review object. So,
yeah.
Like, you don't have to match against kind if you don't want.
Right.
It's just if you try to do that, and you kind of know this, like some rego just doesn't work with audit.
Right. Yeah.
Like the requesting user, if you want to use that,
right.
You're kind of gone from audit. Same thing. Just many more instances of it.
Okay. Much to think about. All right. Well, thanks for the the brainstorming here. Yeah. And also we're like over.
Yeah. State-based policy.
Okay, state-based policy. All right. Well, it's good to see everyone.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.